Less than 2 decades ago, the remote island was facing an environmental catastrophe caused by an explosion of rats and mice.
When thousands of rats were left alone with penguins on a small island, no one could have predicted what would happen next. No one paid much attention at first, but what happened next would spark one of the most shocking environmental stories scientists had ever seen.
Rats and mice that were killing wildlife and destroying nesting areas.
It started quietly, just a few unexpected changes. But soon, the island itself began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted.
So all the vegetation, which then had impacts on wildlife.
This is the extraordinary story of Macquarie Island and the shocking results of a simple mistake that spiraled out of control. The island that time forgot. Macquarie Island sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the wild Southern Ocean. This 34-kilometer stretch of Greenland seemed peaceful enough, but it would become the setting for one of the most shocking ecological experiments in modern history. In 1810, when explorers first found the island, they discovered a place unlike any other on Earth. The beaches teemed with huge elephant seals basking in the sun. Groups of royal penguins made loud, cheerful noises that echoed across the coast. But what truly set this island apart lay beyond the shore. Tall tussock grass moved gently in the wind, forming dense meadows taller than a grown person. Towering megaherbs, like the Macquarie Island cabbage, rose like leafy giants across the land. This was not a normal island. It was a wild Eden, untouched by time, where nature had grown freely for thousands of years. The animals had evolved in isolation. They had no natural predators, and their survival strategies reflected that. Petrels, for instance, spent their days over the open sea during the day and only returned at night to hide in underground burrows. This clever plan had worked perfectly for many generations. But then came the first mistake. The island's faraway location, which had kept it safe for so long, suddenly became its weakness. In the early 1800s, seal hunters came, and along with them came uninvited stowaways, tiny creatures that didn't belong. Rats, mice. No one realized it at the time, but what followed would become one of the most disturbing cautionary tales in environmental history. Thousands of rats, left to spread freely among the native wildlife, especially the defenseless penguins, would set off a chain of events that shocked the scientific world. Macquarie Island, once the island that time forgot, was about to become infamous, and the results of that early invasion would take more than 2 centuries to fully understand and try to undo. The unwelcome guests arrive. The seal hunters who came to Macquarie Island in the 1800s had no idea they were carrying the seeds of destruction in their cargo holds. Hidden among their supplies and equipment were creatures that would change the island forever. Rats and mice. These weren't just pests. They were survivors, resilient enough to handle long sea voyages, and opportunistic enough to make any new place their home. For them, Macquarie Island was paradise. No predators, endless shelter, and more food. And among that food, the island's most vulnerable inhabitants. The petrels that had once nested safely in underground burrows were among the first to fall. For thousands of years, these birds had lived without the need to defend themselves from ground predators. But now, their safe havens suddenly became all-you-can-eat buffets for the hungry rodents. But the rats weren't content with just eating eggs. They discovered that baby birds were easy targets, and even sleeping adult birds weren't safe. And the rats didn't stop there. They ate everything they could find. Flowers, seeds, fruits, and tiny sprouting plants, leaving behind a trail of destruction that spread quickly across the island. The mice, smaller but even more numerous, joined in. They targeted insects, eating larvae, caterpillars, moths, spiders, and beetles. The very threads that held Macquarie Island's ecosystem together were being pulled apart. At first, the seal hunters only noticed the damage to their own food supplies. Rats and mice were getting into everything, eating their provisions and making life miserable. Something had to be done, and the solution seemed obvious then. Who better to catch rats and mice than cats? Maybe it was intentional. Maybe the cats arrived by accident. No one knows for sure. But by the early 1800s, one thing was clear. Cats were now part of Macquarie Island's fragile equation. And with them, the island's problems were about to multiply. Now the island was filled with thousands of rats, countless mice, free-roaming cats, and native penguins, all living together in a small space. What followed would escalate into one of the most shocking ecological disasters scientists had ever witnessed, proof that leaving rats alone with penguins on a small island can spiral into far more than anyone ever imagined. When solutions become problems. The cats were supposed to fix everything. Brought in to hunt the rats and mice overrunning Macquarie Island, they were meant to restore balance. After all, cats are expert predators, and rodents were their specialty. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work. But on this isolated island, where birds had never learned to fear predators, the cats found easier prey. Instead of chasing rats, they turned their attention to the island's defenseless seabirds. Birds that had nested safely for thousands of years suddenly had no protection. They didn't know to fly away. They didn't know how to fight back. And the cats didn't just hunt to survive. They hunted for sport. The cats went on a hunting spree that was beyond anything the island had ever seen. It was a massacre. They killed an estimated 60,000 seabirds every single year. That's more than 160 birds every single day. Species that had lived on the island for thousands of years began disappearing one by one. The Macquarie Island rail, a small flightless bird that couldn't escape the cats, went extinct. The colorful Macquarie Island parakeet also vanished forever. In total, more than 10 different types of seabirds were wiped out completely, some before scientists even had the chance to study them. Meanwhile, the rats kept multiplying. While the cats hunted birds, the rats ran wild, raiding nests, devouring plants, and outpacing any predator that tried to contain them. The very plan meant to control the problem had only made it worse. Then came another well-meaning mistake. In 1878, someone came up with what they thought was another brilliant idea. Following an old tradition, they released rabbits on the island. The reason was simple. If sailors ever got shipwrecked near Macquarie Island, they would have rabbits to catch and eat for food. But no one considered what would happen when rabbits found themselves on a lush island with no natural predators and unlimited food. They multiplied at an astonishing rate. By 1968, there were over 100,000 rabbits hopping around the island. These weren't cute, harmless bunnies either. They were eating machines that devoured everything in sight. The towering megaherbs, the thick tussock grass. Even the roots of native plants were eaten down to nothing. Entire hillsides began to collapse as plant life vanished. The island that had once been a green, vibrant paradise was turning into a barren wasteland. But the worst was yet to come, and the shocking results of leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on this small island were about to reach their devastating peak. Paradise lost. By the mid-1900s, Macquarie Island no longer looked like the wild paradise early explorers had once marveled at. The vibrant, otherworldly landscape was nearly unrecognizable. Where giant tussock grass had once swayed in the breeze, there were now bare patches of eroded soil. Where magnificent megaherbs had towered over the landscape, only stubby remnants remained. The transformation was staggering. It looked less like a nature reserve and more like a battlefield. Rabbits were to blame for much of it. They had eaten approximately 40% of all vegetation on the island. They didn't just nibble on leaves, but devoured entire plants, roots and all. When the plants were gone, they dug up the soil, looking for more food. What they left behind was a pockmarked moonscape, stripped of life and collapsing under its own weight. And then came the disaster that shocked the world. In September 2006, a massive landslide hit Lusitania Bay, home to one of the island's most important king penguin colonies. Over 500 square meters of hillside, loosened by years of erosion and rabbit damage, suddenly gave way, burying hundreds of king penguins alive. It was a devastating moment that made headlines and marked the point of no return. Elsewhere, the island's surviving birds were barely hanging on. Without plant cover, their nests were exposed. Albatross chicks perched on cliff edges became easy targets for predators like skuas. Petrels and penguins, once masters of their environment, were now vulnerable on every front. Scientists who visited the island during this time were horrified by what they saw. One researcher described it as nothing but a pretty paddock, a haunting understatement for a place that had once been bursting with biodiversity. The damage wasn't just visible, it was irreversible in some places. The rats, meanwhile, thrived. With fewer cats left to keep them in check, the rat population soared to an estimated 36,000 rats. They scurried around the island, eating everything from bird eggs to rare plant seeds, and multiplying in the shadows. The mice weren't far behind, with over 100,000 contributing to the devastation. chewing through whatever scraps remained of the island's delicate ecosystem. Some of Macquarie's rarest life forms could only survive inside small fenced areas built by researchers. Two types of orchids that existed nowhere else in the world were completely dependent on human intervention for survival. The tragedy of Macquarie Island had become painfully clear. Leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small, isolated island had sparked a chain reaction so severe that even time itself seemed unable to heal it. And the full extent of the damage, ecological, emotional, and symbolic, was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The deadly chain reaction. What happened on Macquarie Island wasn't just a simple case of too many animals eating too many plants. Scientists realized they were witnessing something far more dangerous. A full-blown trophic cascade. That's the scientific term for a chain reaction in an ecosystem, where a change at one level causes massive unintended consequences across every other level. And Macquarie Island was becoming the textbook example of it, only much worse. It started with a decision that seemed logical at the time. Bring in cats to control the rats and mice. But instead of solving the problem, the cats found the island's seabirds to be easier, more defenseless prey. The bird population collapsed. Then came another well-intentioned move. Authorities realized the cats were causing massive damage. So, beginning in 1985, a targeted eradication campaign was launched. One by one, they hunted the cats down. And by June 2000, the final tally stood at 2,479 cats removed. The island was cat-free for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. At first, it seemed like the plan was working. Bird species that hadn't been seen in decades started returning to the island. Blue and gray petrels, which had disappeared from the main island, began reappearing. It was like ghosts returning to their ancestral home. It felt like a victory. But nature had one more twist in store. With their main predators gone, the rabbit population exploded beyond anything the island had ever seen. And this time, it wasn't thousands. It was over 300,000. The rabbits devoured everything green, from native grasses to megaherbs, until there was virtually nothing left. Hillsides collapsed under their own weight. Roots had once held the soil in place. But now, with no vegetation to anchor the earth, entire cliffs began crumbling into the sea. You didn't need to walk the island to see the damage. Scientists comparing satellite images from 2000 and 2007 could see the scale of destruction from space. The returning birds found themselves in an even worse situation than before. Yes, there were no cats to hunt them anymore, but there also wasn't anywhere safe to nest. The rabbits had eaten all the vegetation that albatrosses and penguins needed for cover to protect their young from heat, rain, or opportunistic predators like skuas. Petrels that tried to dig burrows found only loose, eroded soil that wouldn't hold together. What should have been a new chapter for the island's wildlife was turning into another disaster. By now, scientists were forced to admit a painful truth. This wasn't just a story about rats, or rabbits, or cats. It was the result of a chain reaction unleashed when thousands of rats were left alone with penguins on a fragile, unprepared island, followed by one misguided solution after another. The damage had spiraled out of control, and half measures would no longer be enough. If Macquarie Island was to be saved, the next move would have to be bold and total. The desperate plan. By 2007, we're staring at a nightmare. Macquarie Island, once a vibrant sanctuary for penguins, seabirds, and rare plants, was on the verge of total collapse. Some experts even warned that without immediate intervention, the island might never recover. It had become what ecologists call an ecological basket case, a place so damaged that nature could no longer heal itself. The Australian and Tasmanian governments realized that only the most extreme solution would work. They had to remove every single invasive animal from the island. Not just some of them, not just the worst ones, but literally every rat, mouse, and rabbit. It was the most ambitious wildlife eradication project ever attempted. It would cost over $24 million and take years of effort, and a multi-pronged assault involving everything from poison pellets to virus outbreaks to specially trained dogs. The first phase focused on rabbits, which were the biggest and most visible problem. Scientists had tried using a virus called myxoma in 1968, which had reduced rabbit numbers to about 20,000. But that wasn't enough. This time, they turned to a more lethal weapon, rabbit calicivirus, also known as rabbit hemorrhagic disease. In February 2011, virus-infected carrot bait was scattered across areas with the highest rabbit populations. The effect was immediate and devastating. The virus swept through colonies with ruthless efficiency, and within months, the rabbit population had crashed. Next came the aerial assault. Helicopters loaded with 300 tons of poison bait flew back and forth across the island, dropping bright green pellets that would kill both rabbits and rodents. The operation had to be timed perfectly, during winter when most seabirds were away from the island, to reduce the risk of accidentally poisoning native species. But dropping poison wasn't enough. Thousands of animal carcasses had to be removed by hand to protect scavenging birds from secondary poisoning. Workers spent months picking up the remains of rabbits and rodents from every corner of the island. Still, the biggest threat came from the survivors. Even a single rat or rabbit, hiding deep in a cave or tucked into a rocky slope, could undo everything. Just a handful could repopulate the island within years. That's when the most elite part of the plan was deployed: the dogs. 12 specially trained detection dogs, including Springer Spaniels, Labradors, and Terriers, were brought to the island along with their handlers. These weren't ordinary pets. They were highly trained specialists who could smell a single rat from hundreds of meters away. It was the ultimate showdown: the most destructive invasive species versus the most determined conservation effort the world had ever seen. The results of leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small island had set off a catastrophe. Now, finally, humanity was trying to make it right. The Great Hunt. The dogs that arrived on Macquarie Island in 2011 were about to embark on the most important mission in conservation history. They were searching for the last surviving rats, mice, and rabbits that could destroy all the progress made so far. Each dog had been carefully selected and trained for months before setting foot on the island. They also had to be tough. Macquarie's brutal weather is legendary, with freezing winds, icy rain, and mud that swallows boots whole. To survive and work in these conditions, the dogs needed thick coats, strong paws, and relentless determination. Every day was a battle against the elements and time. Leading this canine army was a Labrador named Wags, working alongside handler Melissa Houghton. Their job was to search every single corner of the island. The team eventually covered more than 90,000 kilometers, the equivalent of walking around the Earth twice. But Macquarie Island wasn't going to make it easy. Steep cliffs, hidden valleys, underground caves, and dense vegetation made the search feel like hunting for needles in a haystack the size of a small city. And all it would take was one rat, one mouse, or one rabbit to bring the entire ecosystem crashing down again. That's where the dogs' extraordinary noses came in. They could smell rat droppings that were weeks old, detect the scent of a mouse that had passed by hours earlier, or track a rabbit to its hidden burrow. Day after day, the teams climbed over rocks, pushed through grass, and explored every cave and crevice they could find, chasing every hint of a scent. The breakthrough moment came in late 2011 when Wags made a discovery that would go down in conservation history. Deep in a remote part of the island, she detected the last family of rabbits on Macquarie Island, an adult female and her babies. This discovery was both exciting and terrifying. Exciting because it proved the dogs could find even the most cleverly hidden animals. Terrifying because if this one family could survive undetected this long, there might be others. This reminded everyone that the mission wasn't over yet. The search intensified. More dogs were brought in, and the teams worked around the clock. Every positive detection was treated like a major victory. Every area cleared of scent was marked as safe. Slowly but surely, the net was closing around the last survivors. By 2013, the dogs hadn't found any signs of rats, mice, or rabbits for months. But no one was ready to declare victory just yet. The island had taught too many painful lessons. They brought in 3 more detection dogs and kept searching. The stakes were too high to make any mistakes. All of it, the poisons, the viruses, the hunts, the heartbreak, had been leading to this final moment. The shocking results of leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small island had pushed nature to the brink. Now at last, it seemed that nature might finally be getting a second chance. The moment of truth. April 8, 2014, became one of the most important dates in conservation history. After 7 years of the most intensive wildlife eradication project ever attempted, Macquarie Island was officially declared pest-free. For the first time in over 200 years, not a single rat, mouse, or rabbit remained on the island. The announcement came after a mandatory 2-year waiting period with no sightings of any invasive species. This wasn't just wishful thinking. It was based on the most thorough search ever conducted. The dogs had covered every possible hiding spot, and sensitive monitoring equipment had been placed throughout the island. But declaring victory was just the beginning. The real test would be whether the island could actually recover from 2 centuries of devastation. Scientists weren't sure what to expect. Some environments never return to their original state, even when the problem is removed. Then something extraordinary happened. The first signs of recovery didn't come from scientists, but from the soil. Plants that had been kept alive in small fenced areas suddenly began spontaneously sprouting in the wild. Seeds buried deep in the earth, some dormant for decades, suddenly woke up. It was like watching a desert bloom after rain. Melissa Houghton, the dog handler who had found the last rabbits, decided to stay on the island as a scientist to witness the transformation. What had once been mocked as a pretty paddock was turning back into something wild, something magical. Tussock grass started growing again, reaching heights that towered over people's heads. The giant megaherbs that had made the island famous began reclaiming their territory. Within just a few years, some areas looked completely different from the barren wasteland they had been. But it wasn't just the plants making a comeback. The birds responded even faster than the plants. Species that had been clinging to survival in tiny populations suddenly began nesting again. White-headed petrels, which had been nearly extinct in 2001, saw their numbers grow rapidly. Blue petrels and gray petrels, which had completely disappeared from the main island, returned and began establishing new colonies. It was more than a rebound. It was a rebirth. The bird recovery created what scientists call a positive feedback loop. As more birds returned to nest on the island, they brought something precious with them: fertilizer. Bird droppings added nutrients to the soil, which helped plants grow even better. Bigger plants provided better hiding places for nesting birds, which attracted even more birds to the island. What had started as one of the world's most shocking environmental disasters, leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small island, was finally being reversed. But Macquarie Island had one more surprise in store. The most astonishing discoveries were yet to come. The shocking results revealed. 10 years after Macquarie Island was declared pest-free, scientists returned to measure the results, and what they found shocked everyone. The scale of the recovery wasn't just surprising, it was unprecedented. What began as a desperate fight to undo a massive ecological mistake became a global beacon of hope for conservation. Macquarie Island, which had been described as nothing but a pretty paddock, has transformed into something that might be even more spectacular than it was before humans arrived. The tussock grass now grows so tall and thick that researchers need to push through it like they're exploring a jungle. And beneath that greenery, penguin tunnels, winding, crisscrossing paths carved into the vegetation, like secret highways built by nature's most loyal survivors. Even the rarest plants have made a stunning comeback. The 2 orchid species that had survived only in tiny fenced areas are now found all over the island. The rare herb Huperzia australiana, which had been reduced to just a few plants, is spreading to new locations every year. Scientists estimate there are now more native animals living on Macquarie Island than at any time in the past 150 years. But perhaps the most shocking result was how quickly nature bounced back. Experts had predicted it would take 30 to 50 years for the island to recover. Instead, major changes were visible within just a few years. Some bird populations are growing by 10% every year, which is almost unheard of in the conservation world. The success of Macquarie Island has already inspired similar projects around the world. Countries like New Zealand are now using these strategies to plan ambitious eradication projects on larger, more populated islands like Raikura Stewart Island. What happened on one small island in the Southern Ocean is now reshaping the future of island conservation everywhere. But the island's safety is still fragile. Today, Macquarie Island is protected with military-level biosecurity. Every ship is inspected before landing. Specially trained dogs search cargo. Every piece of equipment, every backpack, even jacket pockets, is scrubbed and vacuumed to keep pests out. The lesson is clear. The cost of prevention is tiny compared to the cost of another catastrophe. So what do the shocking results of leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small island really teach us? That humans can cause immense destruction, but we can also be the ones to repair it. Macquarie Island proves that recovery is possible. What part of Macquarie Island's story shocked you the most? Have you seen invasive species affect nature in your own community? Let us know in the comments, and share this story to remind others of what's possible when we fight for the planet.